I used the flowchart to break down the code, and the flowchart is what I will use to describe the code. So these first few lines up here are outside files that you download so that you can import the data that you need to find for the stock prices. This right here is fetching that historical stock and market data. All of this wonderful code all the way down to the Sharpe ratio is calculating the daily stock and market returns based off of the data that we imported from up here. Then it's going to print off those returns of all those calculations that it did up here. Then this is an example of what that printed outlook or the risk metrics are supposed to display as. Then it ends the code. Okay. This function, we have the start of the code up here when we define what the code is. Then it has the user input, gets user inputs. It has the user input, principal, interest rate, and loan term. And then it defines all of those categories. You can see in that red where it prompts the user to input those. Then it converts the annual rate to a monthly rate, and that's what it's doing right here when it divides the annual rate by 100, then 12, then multiplies the years by 12. Then it calculates a monthly payment using the amortization formula, and that's all that wonderful work right here. And then it's also going to print off those values. Then it stores whatever remaining balance as the principal going into your loop. Then this whole piece of code is your loop that calculates interest for the month, updates the balance by adding and subtracting interest from the monthly payments. Then this is that if function that's going to determine whether or not it needs to break the loop. It's saying if the balance equals 0, then we break the loop, we'll print off the loan has been paid off, and then we end the code. If the balance does not equal 0, then that's where that loop comes into factor, and we loop through this whole process again and again until the balance is paid off. And then once it finally says the balance equals 0, then we can print off that the loan has been paid off, and then we end that code. Okay. Again, this is importing, after you start the code, this is importing the stock information that we need to be able to run this code. So this code, what it does is it imports those information that we need. Then it's going to ask and prompt the user to input the stock symbol so that way it knows which stock to grab. And then it's going to ask them to input the weights of the stock they want. If those weights do not equal 1, it will print off an error message and it'll stop this code before it even starts it. But if the weights equal 1, then it will run through this code. And when the rates equal 1, which everything I just explained is like right there, then when the rates equal 1, then it will fetch those live prices. And then once it's fetching those live prices, and that's also happening right here, then it's going to run through if it's missing lines or not. If it is missing lines, you can see right here, it's going to print off that warning, no price data found for whatever stock you wanted. It's going to say it may be delisted or unavailable. Then it's going to tell you, it's going to bring you down here, say, no valid data, and it's going to print off an error, and it's going to end. Wait, I'm sorry. If it's missing, it's going to print off this error, and it's going to kill the program. If it's not missing, then you get to run down to this Next line. Then through here, it's going to ask two things. It's going to say, since it's not missing, does it have valid data or not valid data? If there's no valid data, that's when it's going to print off that error for fetching whatever stock you inputted, and then it's going to print the error and end the code. If you have all valid data, then it's going to run through this, and it's going to return those live prices for you. And then it's going to output all of this that you asked for it to output when you ran that code. And it's really going to follow this main output down here. Again, this is just an example of how the output should look. There we go. Then this code was broken into two parts. It defined this whole part. As you know, it starts with the calculating of the present value, then it goes to calculating the present value coupon, then calculating the present value face, then adding those together, then giving you a brown price that way. So that way you could input it yourself instead of it importing it. Still, it's importing from Yahoo Finance, but it still allows you the option, to input that data for yourself. Then the first part of the code, we're starting with our code. We're getting those user inputs as long as we don't import them, as long as we don't manually insert them ourselves. Then we're checking if the market is available. And again, all that stuff, it's finding right there. Then it's checking to see if the market is available, which is right down here. And if the market is not available, then it's using a preset rate of 5%. If the market is available, it'll use the real market that it got from the Yahoo Finance or that you input yourself. Then based on whatever happens, it's still going to run through this and calculate all those payments. Then it's going to print off all of this in that bond price information in the layout that you're wanting it to print out. Okay. Stock metrics. So we start the code, and again, it's importing all those imports that we need to be able to run this code. Then it's going to have the user input the starting amount of cash and what stock it's wanting to be imported from all of these applications. Then it's going to fetch those stock prices from Yahoo Finance that the user inputted as it wants. Then it's going to ensure that it's going to fetch the stock data. But when it fetches it, which is that line right there, it's going to remove all the missing values and then reset the index for easy access. And that happens all in those three lines. Then it's going to calculate that 7-day moving average. Then it's going to define your trading variables right here, which is just putting cash equals starting cash, stocks owned starting with 0, trade history, again, that's being imported. Then it's going to create this trading loop that checks your buy-sell conditions. And then it's going to track all of that in for buy-sell conditions information. Then it's going to print the results, which is right here, of your trading information. And then it's going to plot a chart, which is a lot of lines of code, where it just makes a nice pretty chart if you run it. That shows you how your stock metrics and what they look like. Function library, where again we're starting that code and we're importing all of this information to be able to run this code. And that's where it also is going to define that present value, future value, rate, years, and cash flows. Then it calculates our present value from the imported information, calculates the future value from the imported information. Then it calculates the net present value. Then it's going to calculate the internal rate of return, all that code. Then it's going to display the results. And again, this is just the example of how it wants it displayed. And this is just the code for all of the calculations that it's doing.